The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 1. The Regular Client. I've been working in this business for years, long enough to stop being surprised by much. You get all kinds of clients, some polite, some rude, some you never want to see again. And then there are the regulars, the ones who treat you like part of their routine, like a scheduled appointment, rather than a person. Rogerio was one of those. Predictable, reliable. He always booked me on the same days, at the same times. Never late, never early. He paid well, and never crossed any boundaries. At first I was grateful for that. Then I started noticing things, small, unsettling details. He'd mention things about my life that I had never told him. You must be tired today. You had a long night with your friends. He was right. I had gone out the night before, but I had never told him that. Another time I came down with a cold, and before I could say anything, he handed me a small pack of medicine. "Saw you weren't feeling great yesterday," he said, with that same polite smile. I laughed it off, assumed he had just gotten lucky with his guess. But then it kept happening. Each time, a little closer, a little worse. At first, I tried to convince myself it was harmless. Maybe I had mentioned something in passing and forgotten. Maybe he was just observant. But then came the night that changed everything. I was out with a friend at a bar across town, a place I had never been to before. It was late, and the place was dimly lit, crowded with people laughing over drinks. I was mid-conversation when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Didn't think you liked places like this." I turned, and there he was, Rogerio, standing too close, holding a drink he hadn't touched. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't told him where I was going. I hadn't even decided on the place myself, until an hour before. I forced a smile, pretending it was just a coincidence. "Small world," I muttered, but my hands felt cold around my glass. He didn't sit with us, but he didn't leave either. Every time I glanced around the room, I saw him, watching. Not in an obvious way, but just enough. Just enough to let me know he was there. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the moment I saw him, the way he stood there, casual yet deliberate. It wasn't an accident. He wanted me to see him, to know he was watching. The next morning, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You looked beautiful last night. That dress suits you." I felt a chill run through me. I hadn't given Rogerio my number. I blocked the number immediately, but the unease didn't fade. I decided to put some distance between us. The next time, he tried to book me. I declined. Said I was unavailable, but that didn't stop him. Instead, he showed up, waiting outside the building where I worked, leaning against his car like he had all the time in the world. "Hey," he said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "I was worried about you. You haven't been answering." His voice was light, casual, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made my skin crawl. I forced a polite smile, pretending everything was normal. "I've just been busy," I said, my voice steady, even though my pulse was racing. I wanted to walk away, to disappear into the crowd, but something told me that would only make things worse. Rogerio studied me for a moment, then nodded like he understood something I didn't. "Busy is good," he murmured, "but don't push yourself too hard. You don't want to get sick again." My stomach twisted. I had never told him I was sick before. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a clingy client who didn't understand boundaries. Rogerio was watching me, closely, Maybe he had been for a long time. I mumbled an excuse and left as quickly as I could, feeling his gaze, on my back the entire way. My hands trembled as I unlocked my apartment door. The second I was inside, I locked every bolt and shut every curtain. My heart pounded in my ears. I wasn't just being paranoid, I was being hunted. For days, I avoided him. I stopped answering unknown numbers, changed my routine, even took different routes home. But no matter what I did, I felt his presence, like a shadow lingering just out of sight. One night, as I stepped into my apartment building, I had the overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. The hallway was quiet, but something felt off. My skin prickled. I turned the key in my lock, pushing the door open as quickly as I could. That's when I noticed it. My window. I always kept it shut, always locked it before leaving. But now it was slightly open, just enough for someone to have been there. Just enough to remind me that locks only work when the person trying to get in follows the rules. My breath caught in my throat. I checked every inch of my apartment, but nothing was missing. No signs of a break-in. And yet, I knew. Rogerio had been here. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak, every shadow, shifting under the streetlights outside my window. My mind raced with possibilities. How long had he been watching me? Had he been inside before? Was he still coming in when I wasn't home? The thought made my stomach turn. I needed to do something. The next morning, I went straight to the police, explaining everything. The messages, the unwanted appearances, the feeling of being watched. The officer took notes, nodded in all the right places, but his face remained indifferent. "Has he threatened you?" he asked. I hesitated. No, Rogerio had never outright threatened me. He had never touched me, never raised his voice. But that was what made it worse. His presence was deliberate, his actions precise. Always just enough to unsettle me, but never enough to be considered a crime. The officer sighed. "There's not much we can do unless he actually does something." The words hit me like a slap. He already had done something. He had invaded my life, made me afraid in my own home. But that wasn't enough. I left the station feeling hollow, as if I had been dismissed like a child with a bad dream. That night, I double-checked every lock, wedged a chair under the door handle, and kept my phone clutched in my hand. I told myself I'd be okay, that he wouldn't escalate, but deep down, I knew better. I barely drifted off when a sound jolted me awake. A soft, deliberate knock. 3 times. My breath hitched. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. No one should be knocking on my bedroom window. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body locked up in pure terror as the silence stretched on. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard it. His voice, muffled through the glass but unmistakable. "Vanessa, I know you're awake." My skin went ice cold. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't even let myself think. He was here, right outside my window. My apartment wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. And the worst part, he wasn't trying to break in. He was waiting for me to let him in. Story 2. The black car. I should have said no. I should have trusted the knot in my stomach when I saw the offer. A ridiculous sum of money for a simple meeting. But work had been slow, and the promise of easy cash was tempting. The request was strange. Sure. Late at night, an isolated location. No details beyond the essentials. But I'd had discreet clients before. People who preferred anonymity. People who didn't want questions. It wasn't new. What was new, however, was the uneasy weight that settled on my chest the moment I pulled up to the meeting spot. He was already there. A sleek black car with tinted windows sat idle under the flickering glow of a distant street lamp. The air smelled of rain and gasoline, the night thick with silence. I hesitated before approaching, but as soon as I did, the passenger door unlocked with a soft click. The interior was dark, save for the dim green glow of the dashboard. A strong, almost suffocating scent of men's cologne filled the space. He was in the driver's seat, barely visible in the low light. He didn't greet me, didn't shake my hand, just nodded once, turned up the radio, and started driving. The first few minutes passed in near silence, except for the low hum of the radio. The music was old, soft jazz, the kind that belonged in dimly lit bars, not in the suffocating air of that car. I tried to break the tension. "So, do you live around here?" My voice came out more uncertain than I wanted. He didn't answer, just kept his eyes on the road, fingers tapping absently on the steering wheel. The rhythmic motion was too controlled, too deliberate, like he was waiting for something. A strange awareness crept up my spine. The drive was taking longer than it should have. I discreetly checked my phone, but there was no service. My stomach tightened. "Hey," I tried again, forcing a casual tone. "I think you missed the turn." This time, he reacted. Slowly, almost lazily, he turned his head just enough to glance at me. His lips curled into a small smile. Not friendly, not reassuring, just wrong. "We're almost there," he said. Something about the way he said it, "we're almost there," made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he savored them, like he was enjoying some private joke I wasn't in on. My pulse quickened. I turned to look outside, but the view was disorienting. The city lights had long since disappeared, replaced by stretches of empty road and dense, towering trees. This wasn't where we were supposed to be. I forced a laugh, trying to mask my unease. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but I need you to stop the car." My hand hovered near the door handle. His smile didn't falter. He just kept driving, the fingers of his right hand drumming against the wheel in that same slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. "Relax," he said, voice as smooth as the jazz still playing on the radio. "We're almost there." Panic started to set in. My fingers tightened around the door handle, testing it. Locked. Of course. My throat went dry. I glanced at him again. He was still calm, too calm, his expression unreadable. The only movement was that steady, unnerving tapping on the wheel. I said, "Stop the car." I tried again, louder this time, forcing authority into my voice. He sighed, almost disappointed, like I had ruined something. Then, without warning, he reached over and placed a hand lightly on my knee. Not forceful, not aggressive, just placed it there. My whole body went rigid. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he murmured, finally looking at me fully. His eyes were dark, reflecting nothing. "Just sit back. We're almost there." A cold wave of fear crashed over me. Every instinct screamed that I was in danger. I yanked at the door handle again, harder this time, but it didn't budge. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Let me out," I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound firm. The smile never left his face, but something in his eyes darkened, like he was growing tired of the game. The car started slowing down. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. Was he actually stopping? But as I looked ahead, I realized we weren't pulling over to the side of the road. We were turning onto a narrow dirt path. barely visible between the trees. The headlights illuminated nothing but darkness ahead, stretching into the unknown. "This isn't funny," I whispered, panic constricting my throat. He just chuckled. "No," he said, "it's not." My breathing turned shallow as the car rumbled over the uneven path, the tires kicking up dust that swirled in the headlights. I could barely see anything beyond the trees. No streetlights, no houses, no signs of life. Just darkness pressing in from all sides. My hands were clammy, trembling against my lap. "Please," I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper now. "Just let me go." He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me this time. His fingers resumed their slow, measured tapping on the wheel. The car rolled deeper into the woods, the road narrowing until it barely seemed passable. My stomach lurched as I realized there was no way out, no place to run, and worst of all, no one knew where I was. The realization hit me like ice water. I was completely alone with him, trapped in this car, deep in the middle of nowhere. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to do something. I forced my shaking hands to move, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My purse was at my feet, but before I could reach for it, he spoke again, his voice eerily calm. "I know you're scared." His fingers stopped tapping, but that's not necessary. His grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles turning white. "We're here." The car rolled to a slow stop. The engine hummed for a moment before falling silent, leaving only the rhythmic chirping of unseen insects in the thick night air. I didn't dare look away from him, but in my peripheral vision, I saw what lay ahead, a clearing, shrouded in darkness. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to know what was out there. For a long, suffocating moment, neither of us moved. The car's interior was thick with silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket. My body tensed, every muscle screaming to react, to fight, to run. But where? My fingers curled into fists, ready to claw, to strike, to do anything to stop whatever was coming. But then, he simply sighed. His hand emerged, holding nothing but a set of car keys. With an air of finality, he turned in his seat to look at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "You can go," he said, almost bored. My heart stuttered in my chest. I didn't move, too afraid this was some twisted trick. His lips curled again into that unsettling, knowing smile. "But if I were you," he added, voice barely above a whisper, "I wouldn't run. Not here." For a long, suffocating moment, neither of us moved. The car's interior was thick with silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket. My body tensed, every muscle screaming to react, to fight, to run. But where? My fingers curled into fists, ready to claw, to strike, to do anything to stop whatever was coming. But then, he simply sighed. His hand emerged, holding nothing but a set of car keys. With an air of finality, he turned in his seat to look at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "You can go," he said, almost bored. My heart stuttered in my chest. I didn't move, too afraid this was some twisted trick. His lips curled again into that unsettling, knowing smile. "But if I were you," he added, voice barely above a whisper, "I wouldn't run. Not here." I didn't wait to ask what he meant. My hands fumbled with the door handle, and this time it opened. The moment my feet hit the ground, I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that car as possible. The night air was thick, damp, filled with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. But something else was there, too. A different sound. A low hum. I skidded to a stop. The noise was faint, but growing. It wasn't coming from the car. It was coming from the trees. My breath hitched as I turned toward the dense woods. Shadows shifted between the trunks. Too fluid, too unnatural. A sickening dread coiled in my gut. He wasn't the threat. He had brought me here. But for what? I spun back toward the car, but the headlights were already fading as it reversed down the dirt path, swallowed by the darkness. He left me there, alone. My legs refused to move. My heart pounded against my ribs as the humming grew louder, the shadows stretching, shifting. I wasn't alone. I don't remember running. I don't remember how I found my way back to the main road. But somehow, I did. I must have, because I woke up in my own bed the next morning, my clothes caked in dirt, my shoes damp with mourning. Dew. No messages, no calls, no sign that any of it had really happened. But there was something new. My car was parked outside, exactly where I'd left it the night before. Except now, sitting on the dashboard, was a single key. A black key, sleek and smooth, attached to no key ring. I don't know how it got there. I don't know what it unlocks. But every night since, I swear I've heard that same low hum outside my window. And sometimes, just barely, I think I see headlights waiting in the distance. What would you have done in my place? Would you have run or stayed to find out what was waiting in those woods? I still don't know if I made the right choice, but if I ever see that black car again, I don't think I'll be as lucky the next time. Story 3. The Hotel of the Forgotten. I've always been careful. Experience teaches you that. You don't take risks in this line of work, and if something feels off, you walk away. Simple as that. So when a new client booked me at a high-end hotel, paying up front, I took it as a good sign. No haggling, no weird requests. Just a businesslike exchange. Clean and straightforward. The kind of professionalism I appreciate. Still, I did my research. The hotel was real, well-reviewed. The kind of place where the carpets swallow your footsteps and the staff wear polite, practiced smiles. Safe. Or at least, it should have been. I should have left the moment I stepped into the room. The air felt thick, like a place that hadn't been disturbed in years, despite its pristine appearance. A strange stillness clung to everything, the kind that makes your skin prickle, though you can't explain why. My client was polite, well-dressed and charming in that practiced way that puts you at ease. "Would you mind leaving your phone by the door?" he asked casually, gesturing toward a small table near the entrance, just so we're not disturbed. It wasn't an unusual request. Some men valued discretion, and I understood that. So, I played along, slipping my phone from my bag and setting it down. But the moment my fingers left it, my stomach clenched. Something about this felt wrong. He smiled as I locked the door, his expression smooth, unreadable. "Good," he said, softly. "Now let's talk." His voice was pleasant, even warm, but something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. I took a seat on the edge of the pristine hotel bed, keeping my posture relaxed, controlled. I had done this enough times to know how to read people, how to de-escalate if needed. But as he leaned forward in the chair across from me, his next words turned my blood to ice. "Did you tell anyone you were coming here tonight?" My mouth went dry. I forced a small, polite smile. "Why do you ask?" I kept my voice even, but my mind was already racing. It wasn't unusual for a client to want privacy, but something about the way he phrased it, slow, deliberate, like he was testing me, felt deeply wrong. Just making conversation, he said, watching me too closely. Does anyone expect you tonight? His smile remained fixed, a little too perfect, as if he had rehearsed it. The air in the room seemed heavier, suffocating. I wanted to stand, to make an excuse and leave, but my instincts screamed that any sudden movement might trigger something I couldn't predict. I reached for my phone without thinking, but the moment my fingers brushed the screen, I knew something was wrong. The screen stayed black. No vibration, no response. Dead. I knew I had charged it before leaving. I always did. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I lifted my gaze back to him. He was still smiling, but his eyes had darkened, sharpening like a predator who had just confirmed his prey was trapped. Strange, he mused, tilting his head slightly. You seem nervous, are you? I swallowed hard, forcing out a short laugh. No, I lied. Just tired. My fingers curled into my palm, trying to suppress the trembling. He leaned back, tapping a finger against the armrest of his chair in slow, rhythmic beats. Juliana, he said, voice smooth as silk. That's your real name, isn't it? My breath caught. I never gave out my real name. Not to anyone. I had been careful, meticulous about my identity. My hands turned cold, my pulse erratic. This wasn't just a bad feeling anymore. This was a trap, and I had walked right into it. I shot up from the bed, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I lunged for the door, twisting the handle with all my strength, but it didn't budge. Locked. My breath hitched, panic clawing up my throat. I turned back to him, and he was still sitting there, calm, watching me. Like he had expected this, like he had done this before. There's no need to be afraid, he murmured. I just wanted to talk. Open the door, or I demanded, forcing steel into my voice. He sighed, shaking his head as if I had disappointed him. You were doing so well, Juliana. So composed, so professional. His tone was almost affectionate. He stood up slowly, taking his time, as if he wanted me to feel just how powerless I was in this moment. I just need to know, do you think anyone would come looking for you? My mind scrambled for an answer. Lie, or tell the truth. If I said no, did that give him permission to do whatever he had planned? If I said yes, would he test it? My breath came too fast, too shallow. Yes, I said quickly. People know where I am. I hoped my voice was steady enough to be convincing. His lips quirked upward, as if I had just told an amusing joke. Is that so? He mused, taking a slow step towards me. I pressed my back against the door, my fingers desperately fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't turn. My vision tunneled, my heartbeat hammering in my skull. I couldn't let this happen. Not like this. The moment he took another step, I did the only thing I could think of. I let out a scream. A raw, desperate sound, tearing from my throat with everything I had. For one terrifying second, I thought the walls of this high-end, sterile hotel would swallow the sound whole. That no one would hear me, but then footsteps. Heavy rushing footsteps outside the door. Someone was coming. The man's expression shifted just slightly. Not fear, something else. Annoyance, as if I had disrupted his plans. He took a step back, his jaw tightening. That's unfortunate, he murmured. And then, to my horror, he reached into his pocket. A key. He turned to the side door, the one leading to the adjoining room, and without another word, He slipped through it, gone. The door burst open a second later. A hotel security guard, a guest from the next room, someone. I didn't care. I stumbled forward, gasping, shaking, unable to speak. The staff asked questions, checked the room, called the police. But by the time they searched the adjoining suite, it was empty. No sign of him. No record of anyone ever booking it. He was gone, as if he had never been there at all. But I know the truth. He had planned for this. He had done this before. And somewhere out there, in another quiet, high-end hotel room, he's waiting for his next guest. I changed my name, moved cities, did everything right. And yet I still wake up at night, thinking I hear his voice whispering from the dark. If he found me once, he can find me again. Would you have played along longer? Would you have run sooner? Or do you think, somehow, you wouldn't have made it out at all? Story 4. The last client of the night. It was almost closing time, and I was exhausted. The club had emptied out except for a few stragglers nursing their drinks, and I was counting the minutes until I could leave. The last shift was always the hardest. Too many drunk hands, too many leering eyes. I was used to it. It came with the job. But when he walked in, I felt something shift in the air. He wasn't like the others. His suit was pristine, expensive looking, the kind that didn't belong in a place like this. He moved with a quiet confidence, sitting at the far end of the bar without ordering a drink. He just watched. Not in the usual way. There was no hunger in his gaze, no expectation, just something else. I was about to ignore him, let the bartender deal with it, but then he beckoned me over. His hand barely moved, just the slightest tilt of his fingers, yet I found myself walking toward him. "Bianca," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. "I'd like to pay you just to talk." That wasn't uncommon. Some men just wanted company. But something in the way he said it sent a cold ripple down my spine. I forced a smile, slipping into the chair across from him. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone light. "What do you want to talk about?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, just little things," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Your shift ends in 20 minutes, right? You usually take the back exit to avoid the drunks out front." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd never seen this man before in my life, yet he spoke like he knew me. "Lucky guess," I said with a small shrug, but my palms were starting to sweat. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not a guess, Bianca. I know a lot about you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "For example, I know you never tell people your real name on the first meeting, that your apartment has a faulty lock on the balcony door, that you keep a picture of your mother in your bedside drawer, but never take it out." My breath hitched. My smile faltered. That last detail, no one knew that. Not even my closest friends. I forced a laugh, trying to mask the unease crawling up my spine. "Okay, that's cute. You did some digging, maybe followed me home once or twice. Not exactly subtle." I crossed my arms, feigning confidence, but my pulse was hammering against my ribs. I needed to end this conversation. "Look, if this is some weird attempt at flirting, I'm not interested." His smile didn't waver, but his fingers drummed lightly against the table. A slow, deliberate rhythm. "Oh, Bianca," he murmured, almost like he pitied me. "You don't remember me, do you?" His gaze darkened, and suddenly the air felt heavier, pressing against my chest. "But I remember you. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." He reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. His grip wasn't tight, but it was firm, like he was testing how much I would resist. The moment his skin touched mine, a sickening wave of familiarity rushed through me. I yanked my wrist back, my breath coming out in shallow bursts. My mind was racing, sifting through old memories, but nothing about this man registered. "I don't know who you are," I said, my voice unsteady. "You've got the wrong person." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. That feeling, that sickening, gnawing familiarity, clung to me like a shadow. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he'd already solved. "You really don't remember, do you?" His voice was quieter now, almost disappointed. "It's okay. I expected that." He reached into his pocket, and I tensed, ready to bolt, but all he pulled out was a small folded photograph. He slid it across the table toward me. "Take a good look," he said, his voice calm but expectant. My fingers hesitated before picking it up. The moment I unfolded it, my stomach dropped. The photo was old, slightly faded, but I recognized it instantly. It was me, years younger, sitting on a swing in a park I hadn't visited since childhood, and standing behind me, watching, was him. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. My fingers trembled as I held the photograph, my vision tunneling in on that single, impossible detail. Him. He had been there, watching, waiting. But why? My mind scrambled for an explanation, but none of them made sense. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the dull hum of the bar. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, as if we were just two old friends catching up. "I took it," he said simply, "that day. You were what, 9, maybe 10? You never saw me, but I was always there." His words slithered through my mind, wrapping around old, forgotten memories like vines suffocating a dying tree. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body felt frozen in place. I wasn't just in danger. I had always been in danger. I shoved the photograph back across the table, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. "You're lying," I said, but my voice wavered. Deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed that. The photo was real. The fear twisting inside me was real. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I don't know what kind of sick game this is, but I'm done." I turned, ready to leave, ready to run, but before I could take a step, his voice stopped me cold. "You can leave if you want," he said, his tone eerily calm, "but it won't change anything. I've been patient, Bianca. I waited until you were old enough to understand, until you were ready." A slow exhale, almost like a sigh. "And now you are." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My pulse pounded in my ears as I forced myself to walk toward the exit, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move faster. I could feel his eyes on me, following every step. And as I reached the door, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I had no idea how long he had been watching me, but I knew, without a doubt, that he wasn't done. Story 5. The scheduled meeting. I should have trusted my gut the moment I saw him. His smile was polished, his handshake firm, and his eyes calm, too. Calm. The kind of calm that doesn't belong in a first-time meeting. But the money was good, and I had dealt with eccentric clients before. So I pushed aside the unease and sat down at the table. A high-end restaurant, dim lighting, soft jazz in the background. It was supposed to be professional, just a preliminary dinner before we discussed the actual business. He insisted on it, and I figured, why not? He was polite, even charming. But then, the questions started. "Do you live alone?" he asked, twirling his wine glass lazily. I hesitated. "Yeah, why?" "No reason, just curious." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The questions kept coming. Did anyone check on me often? Did I usually tell people where I was going? Was I the kind of person who kept a routine? I laughed it off, pretending not to notice the pattern, but something about the way he listened, leaning in, absorbing my answers too intently, made my stomach knot. Still, I stayed. It was just dinner, right? I forced myself to focus on the food, cutting into my steak, while his questions grew more specific. "Do you ever leave a spare key somewhere? You know, in case you get locked out?" He laughed, as if it was just casual conversation, but my fingers tensed around the knife. I muttered something vague, trying to steer the topic elsewhere, but he was persistent. I only ask because I do that myself. Just seems practical, doesn't it? His gaze was steady, unblinking. The unease was creeping back, stronger this time. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just socially awkward. Still, I took my time, splashing cold water on my face, grounding myself. When I returned to the table, he was gone. My plate was untouched, his wine glass half empty. And then I noticed it. My bag was missing, my phone, my wallet, my house keys. The blood drained from my face as I frantically checked under the table, around the chair. Nothing. Panic prickled at my skin as I flagged down a waiter. "The man I was with, where did he go?" My voice was tight, barely controlled. The waiter frowned, glancing toward the entrance. "He left just a few minutes ago. Took his coat and, your bag, I think. I assumed you were together." A cold weight settled in my stomach. He had my phone, my ID, my house keys, every piece of information he needed to find me. My mind raced, grasping for logic. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he had grabbed it absent-mindedly. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. That wasn't it. I rushed outside, scanning the street. The night air was sharp, but the sidewalk was nearly empty. No sign of him. My breath came faster, uneven. I patted my pockets, hoping, praying that I had left my keys somewhere else, that my phone was still with me, but they weren't. They were in that bag, and so was my address. I forced myself to think. The restaurant had my name on the reservation. Maybe I could call someone from the front desk, cancel my credit cards, figure out a way to get home safely. But then what? He had my keys. Even if I changed the locks tomorrow, tonight, I had no way of knowing if he was already on his way to my apartment. My stomach twisted at the thought of him standing outside my door, waiting. A taxi slowed near the curb, and for a brief second, I considered just getting in, going anywhere but home. But I couldn't run forever. I turned back inside, my voice unsteady, as I asked the hostess, "Can I use your phone?" She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the other waitstaff, then finally handed it over. My fingers trembled as I dialed. First, my bank. Hold times were excruciating. Then the building superintendent. Voicemail. Lastly, the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm, detached. "Ma'am, you said your belongings were stolen?" "Yes," I said quickly. "But it's not just that. He has my house keys. My address is in my wallet. He knows where I live." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Did he threaten you?" "No, but..." I swallowed hard. He was asking me questions, personal ones, about whether I live alone, if anyone checks in on me. Saying it out loud made it feel worse, more real. Another pause. Then, We can send a unit to patrol your area, but unless he tries to enter your home or harm you, there's not much we can do. I felt a rush of frustration, so I just, wait, hope he doesn't show up. My voice was rising, panic creeping in despite my efforts to stay composed. The dispatcher hesitated before responding. I understand your concern, ma'am. My advice, stay somewhere safe tonight. A friend's place, a hotel, just as a precaution. If you see anything suspicious, call us immediately. I hung up, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. A hotel. That was the logical choice. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already too late. He had left minutes before I realized my bag was missing. Enough time to get a cab, to reach my apartment before I could even warn anyone. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he already there? Waiting in the hallway? Inside? I had no way of knowing. I checked into a hotel a few blocks away, but sleep never came. Every sound in the hallway made my skin crawl. I kept imagining him standing outside my door, listening, or worse, standing outside my apartment, using my key, stepping inside like he belonged there. By morning, I called a locksmith, changed my locks, canceled my cards, tried to erase him from my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just avoided danger. I had postponed it. He knew my name, my face, my routine. And if he had planned this much in advance, what was stopping him from trying again? It's been weeks, and nothing has happened. But that's the worst part. Nothing has happened. I check my locks obsessively, scan every crowd, jump at unknown numbers calling my phone. Maybe he's out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. Or maybe I was never the first woman he did this to. And I won't be the last. Would you have handled it differently? Or was I already trapped the moment I sat down at that table?